There's a new game smashing the block, and that would be Gigabash. This is a kaiju fighter game, which is why it reminds me a lot of Godzilla Domination. There are three modes to the game. There's a story mode, which does give you a pretty interesting look at each of the characters, but it's mostly just a framework to introduce new monsters to you. Sometimes there's a little bit of a mix-up in between where you can just go around and destroy the city, and that was something that was a lot of fun to me. It kind of reminded me of Rampage, and I wish the game went with a little bit more city destruction rather than monster versus monster fight, but it is a fighting game, so that's what you get. If you tire of the story or you don't want to play that one particular character out, you can load up just a free-for-all match. There's a team fight, a 2v2 kind of scenario, and that is also with online and bot capabilities. When I'm going through this story mode, some of those fights were real roadblock, and I thought this was going to be a little bit more of a simple kind of game. I loaded it up on the regular difficulty, but that didn't seem to matter. There was a lot of difficulty to some of these fights, and there's a fair amount of depth to the combat. There's, instead of just a heavy attack and a light attack and, you know, maybe a 1-2 combo, there's a lot more to it. You have a block stance, you have a dash, and you can combine these with button inputs to change what kind of attack you're doing. Some of those string together in more interesting ways. You can form your own combos, and now you're playing a game at just a much higher speed than what I first thought I was getting into, and I was very pleasantly surprised. There was a minigame section to this, and unfortunately, because there's nobody online at the time, I didn't really get to experience that one. I'm something I'm going to circle back around later because I'm curious, what kind of minigames are there? I mentioned that this reminds me of a Game Boy Advance game, but I don't mean to say that in a derogatory manner. Game Boy Advance is, of course, quite old now, but the graphic kind of necessity in this game is very low. You don't really need super HD 4K textures in a setting like this. I found the graphics actually do the job well. The audio is pretty unremarkable. There's a bit of a tune going on in the game in the menus, but other than that, you hear a bit of monster kind of shrieking, some buildings falling apart. Again, nothing spectacular, but it does the job just fine. Something that I thought was a little bit funny was in the story mode, how much it kind of borrows from other giant monster movie kind of feelings. The intro for one of the characters, the very first chapter of the story, is very much Kong on Skull Island. It almost follows the same story until they land and the monster goes crazy. That's kind of where the story derails, but you immediately, by the end of that campaign, are fighting several different monsters. One of them is more of a Mothra kind of creature. Not a giant moth, but one kind of plant-based creature. Jumping into Gigabash might seem like it's just a kind of mindless assault game, and that can't be less true. This has a good amount of depth to it for a fighting game, and in a three-dimensional kind of setting like this, it's really not done very often. I have to look back to Godzilla Domination to kind of find something similar, and just like that game, I had a really good time with this one. That depth is something that'll keep you there for just a little bit longer, and I feel like there's going to be a pretty interesting PvP scene coming up in this game in the next very short while. Now, I had a good time with this game, although I recognize it's kind of a small game in scope. There isn't a whole lot to this, and I wish there was more of a city destruction kind of mode, but that's really not important. This game gets a 7.5 from me because it does the job in every one of its categories, but there's just something missing, some sort of spark. Maybe online PvP will kind of bridge that.